Hi, everybody, and welcome back to our final segment on kind of reclaiming conversation. We have covered a lot of ground, but today we want to kind of end on learning to disagree well. And so, if you'll remember last time, we talked about trying to embrace non dual thinking and understanding that sometimes that means you have to stay in the tension of two differing perspectives. And rather than just assume, okay, well, since conversation is a competition, then one has to be right and one has to be wrong. Non-dual thinking allows space for maybe you're both right and you're both wrong all at the same time. So Alan, talk a little bit about that for us.
Well, if you describe it that way and you talk about tension, and actually considering the other person's perspective, that's not really built into the DNA often of the church or of the Christian culture. The way we talk about it, and it's not untrue, it's just often a partial truth, which is that we have capital T truth, right? We believe, and if you're a follower of Jesus, you should believe that we have the truth of life. But the way we often deal with that, as our job is to communicate that, in communicating that truth, I would almost put it like if you remember school. It's like the person in class, the know-it-all that sits, to the side, and every question, her hand goes up, right? I mean, and just cannot wait to get it out. Like, that's because the only important thing is the answer in that situation, not allowing space for others to learn, not allowing anything else other than blurting out the answer. And I think sometimes that's the way we view our conversations as Christians, is that our job is to communicate the truth, even if that means shouting the answer above all the other voices. And so talking about how conversation fits into that kind of dynamic, it doesn't. That's not conversation at its core. And while I think there's a place for communicating truth, and sometimes even bluntly, that there is space for this other thing that we've been talking about, which is a very different idea, which is conversation, consideration, taking the time to listen, to think, and even consider someone else's perspective. But that's not often our slant or our approach, is it?
Yeah. And it's interesting because you talk about that person. I keep thinking of that scene in Friends where Monica goes, they just flash to her and she goes, I know. And they say, Monica, you asked the question. Like,
right.
That's kind of what we do. But when you do that, and especially if you think about that scene, you make no space for other people. Yeah. And a lot of the times when we go in and we say we have the capital T truth and we want to go in, we do so in a way that is really all about us. And we're not making room for other people. We're just blanket statement, here's how it goes. And when we talk about truth, I think a lot of the times we understand, because we are followers of the truth, that we assume that our handle on truth is always correct. And that's just not right. Like, the way we understand truth as fallen, flawed human beings is not complete. It's not always accurate. And so we have to kind of learn to have a lot of humility as we approach conversations, to understand part of the reason I need to have a conversation is because I don't have the final answer. I don't have it all figured out. I'm a Christian and I am committed to that. But man, my viewpoints and my perspective is flawed.
Yeah.
And so we have to have humility and we have to have courage, because a lot of times when we're hanging on to that capital T truth, we think that our understanding is that capital T truth. And so if any part of our understanding starts to break down, we're scared that capital T truth goes away altogether. And so it requires a lot of courage to be able to say, I'm not only going to be humble enough to admit that I don't know it all, but I'm going to allow you to challenge me. And I'm going to allow you to help me reflect on some of the ways I think about things. And that can be really, really scary. Yeah. And that's not like oh, the simpletons over here are scared of those. Anytime you have somebody challenging what you hold dear, that can be scary. So it requires a lot of courage.
Yeah. Well, I love the idea of courage, and the fact that you brought up it takes a lot of humility that we, for honest, the Christian community doesn't always have to actually submit ourselves to listening to somebody else's viewpoint. And just the idea that just because, like you said, we have that truth, we follow the truth, to entertain the idea that we may not have everything right is an act of humility and courage. I love the way you said that. And because of the way we often talk, we've been talking throughout these videos about creating space for somebody. And as someone who ministers at church, as a church, it is constantly in our conversation that we want to reach out. We want to get, we want to evangelize. We want to have good outreach to our community and to others so we can bring them in. But a lot of times the way we try to do that is we don't want to create space for them. That capital T truth just takes up so many seats at the table that we don't want to allow that different perspective to come in. Because we have this weight on us that we believe we always have to be right because we have truth. Yeah. And I think that's just a flawed thinking. That part of our job is the truth should create in us humility and courage. It should not make us nervous to listen to other people's perspectives. So that should give us ultimate confidence to be able to be humble, to have the courage to bring other people in and listen to their viewpoint with the understanding that they may actually have something, not that we can just change them, but they may actually have something to say to us. Mm-hmm. And that we may actually need to change sometimes. And I don't think that as Christians, we often have that dynamic down very well. We don't do that very well. And yet that is often what is more needed. Because, the fact is I've been wrong before, I'm probably wrong now, and I need someone to help me figure it out.
Yeah.
So.
And as Christians, it's amazing to me that we don't do more of this, because we should be the people who are trying the hardest to understand what is true and what is real and what is good and what is beautiful all the time, rather than just saying, oh, I have it figured out and I'm going to lock in here. It's a process of discovery. And one of the best way we can do those is by talking to people who we actually disagree with. And the best way that we kind of wrap our minds around truth is by disagreeing with people and hearing their perspectives and understanding that even if we don't change their mind or change their opinion, we grow in our own understanding and our own walk. And I'm just amazed that we don't do this more. Because if we assume that Jesus is the truth, then somebody else having a different opinion than me shouldn't be scary, because they can change. Truth is truth. Like someone disagreeing with you can't change what is true. Yeah. And actually, in the act of listening to someone who disagrees, you may learn to understand truth a little bit more.
And learning to disagree well isn't, it's such a key to growth and maturity, because sometimes the outcome of disagreeing isn't a changed mind. Sometimes it allows you to consider someone else's perspective, and you may end up thinking the exact same thing you did before, but you have at least understood what the other side and perspective looks like in a better way. It may solidify you, or it may prayerfully, hopefully, change your mind sometimes. Conflict, those type of things, tension, those are all necessary parts of growing and becoming the people we're supposed to be. And so disagreeing well is really, we don't disagree well in our culture, but disagreeing well is a huge piece of what it looks like to mature and to grow.
Well, and that's why disagreeing well to me kind of puts everything that we've been talking about over the last few weeks together, is because to disagree well, you have to let go of being competitive in your conversation. To disagree well, you have to learn to listen, and not just to respond, but to actually learn and grow from the other people. To disagree well, you have to have that non-dual thinking where you're okay with just living in the tension of disagreement. And even if so, you mentioned how sometimes our minds aren't changed, but what happens a lot of times is we actually build empathy for the people that we disagree with. And as Christians, that's what we need to be doing. We're called to love other people, and when we have empathy for the people that we disagree with, that goes a long way in learning to love other people, especially our enemies, which Jesus calls us to. And so, really, I think this disagreeing well piece is what we need to learn to do in conversation. We need to gather more voices in our life. We need to hear more people, and we need to say, I love you and you love me, and we are okay with the fact that we don't get along on certain issues. Because in the end, like you said a couple of videos ago, we have so much more in common than we realize. So that's kind of our encouragement and blessing for you as you go out and think about the art of conversation, is really work through some of the things you may need to do to hear other voices, and to have the courage and the humility to disagree well and learn from other people. So that'll wrap up our art of conversation, and we will see you next week with a brand new series.
Grace and peace.